Where Freud maintains a dignity beyond approach in his formal yet cordial reports of sexual matters, Lacan seems to go out of his way to flirt, mock, seduce, and insult. Hi there, comrades. Happy New Year. I'm your host, Tadas Vinokur. Flickr Theory Reviews did unfortunately experience a little bit of a hiatus due to the holiday season and my extremely hectic relocation from San Francisco to Los Angeles, but here I am in my new studio, healthy, excited, and eager to talk about the sugar daddy of all the contemporary humanities, Jacques Lacan. More concretely, the discussion of Lacanian psychoanalysis today will appear as a byproduct. In fact, today I'm discussing the intricacies of the feminist relationship with this Lacanian thought. This I will accomplish by looking at the first chapter of Elizabeth Grosz's book, Jacques Lacan, A Feminist Introduction. Having in mind that Jacques Lacan represents one of the main, most influential psychoanalytic schools of the 20th century, it seems quite natural that feminist thought has consolidated a distinct relationship with it. After all, psychoanalysis, right from its inception, shared an intimate bond with the feminist movement. Our friend Freud did accomplish something radical. He did talk to women. He uncovered the male dominance that is deep-rooted within the society wherein women are responsible for mothering. Whether it's Clara Thompson or Karen Horney, feminists did appreciate the capacity of psychoanalysis to demystify the biological lack that women supposedly possess and which determines the allocation of gender roles and, in general, the female inferiority. However, Freud's emancipation was anything but straightforward, female emancipation. He did always speak from a purely male perspective, as his lecture on femininity perfectly exemplifies. Femininity for him was nonetheless a mere enigma for him and his men's club to analyze and uncover and to solve. When referring to the question of femininity, Freud says, "You have not escaped worrying over this problem of femininity, those of you who are men. To those of you who are women, this will not apply because you yourselves are the problem. In other words, shush, women, you are the problem. We, men with diplomas, will talk about this." Clearly, there are some issues with the male gaze here. Similarly, in Lacanian psychoanalysis, too, the feminist cause is not straightforward. There are some very apparent perils and complexities as well. Luckily, Grosz here comes to our aid. She clarifies the feminist relationship with the Lacanian psychoanalysis. Well, Grosz starts off with something we already have established. She says relations between psychoanalysis and women have always been and remain today highly ambivalent and fraught with difficulties. So what are the causes, according to Grosz, of this incongruence, this dissonance and ambiguity within the relationship between psychoanalysis and feminism? Grosz says that both feminism and psychoanalysis is fascinated by each other. She says that a lot of Freud's work owes, a lot to the female hysterics who are talkative and loquacious. The same way Lacan began his psychoanalytic research focusing strictly on the so-called mad women, psychotics and paranoiacs and hysterics and mystics. Grosz says that the whole cast of characters in early Lacanian theory consists of women. Here I should come back to the word fascination. I said already that according to Grosz, psychoanalysis as a discipline is fascinated with feminism and vice versa. Fascination etymologically symbolizes attraction, irresistible enchantment, and charm. By the same token, this implies that the relationship between feminism and psychoanalysis is extremely volatile, extremely unstable, and frankly, outright dangerous. In Lacan's opinion, this is so due to the imaginary identification in which the self, for example, psychoanalysis, strives to incorporate the other, feminism, in an act that is aggressive as it is loving. It is aggressive and is loving at the same time. Be that as it may, Grosz says that psychoanalysis is nonetheless very valuable both as a mode of analyzing women and as a mode of analysis available for women's use in understanding patriarchal domination. She also acknowledges a rather obvious problem with psychoanalysis. Psychoanalysis often validates prevalent conceptions of masculinity and femininity. Grosz says that feminists ought to rejuvenate psychoanalytic thought. We need to acknowledge the active engagement of many feminists in psychoanalytic theory. We must also place psychoanalysis in the context of history of misogyny, she says. For Grosz, psychoanalysis is the most complex, well-developed psychological theory, which retains honesty. It retains honesty towards the topic of women. In other words, Grosz thinks psychoanalysis deserves praise in that regard. We have to stretch psychoanalysis. We have to transgress its limits in order to make psychoanalysis more relevant today, says Grosz. Now, because this chapter is the first one in this book, Grosz goes on to introduce a little bit of psychoanalytic theory to the reader. This book is about Lacan, obviously, but as she herself acknowledges, Lacan is a devoted follower of Freudian theory. Hence, we can't just sweep Freud under the rug. Freud will serve as a point of departure for a more intensive focus on the work of the enfant terrible, Jacques Lacan. After all, Lacan almost single-handedly succeeded in signaling the importance of Freudian theory to disciplines outside psychology. Correspondingly, we ought to talk about Freud. We can never escape Freud. Well, what is it that we have to know about Freud? Firstly, we have to keep in mind that Freud tried to be a scientist, or at least he tried. He tried to be a proper and a methodical scientist. Hence, some of the wider implications of Freudian work are sometimes undermined by Freud himself due to this commitment to the scientific method. Lacan then is the one who revises Freud. Lacan was able to manifest the things in Freudian theory that Freud himself was unaware of. Lacan edits Freud, so to say. For him, unconscious ceases to be merely the submerged consciousness. It rather becomes the other kind of logic and reason. For Lacan, unconscious is not reducible to faculties available to consciousness, Grosz says. Grosz continues her essay by describing Freud's biggest achievements. She describes psychoanalysis as a scandalous field of knowledge, in its early days at least. When Freud was traveling to United States, Freud exclaimed to Jung, "They don't realize that we are bringing them the plague." So even Freud was aware of how scandalous and radical his theories were. Grosz describes Freud as a person who gradually became famous. First, he was working in what he described as splendid isolation. And just after the publication of his more important works, did he gain some, sympathizers, most of whom nonetheless ultimately deviated from his fundamental theory. Grosz lists most important achievements of Freudian psychoanalysis. The talking cure, or the hypnosis, which demonstrated that hysteria can be treated by verbal technique. Grosz naturally emphasized the role of unconscious in Freudian psychoanalysis as the feature that makes psychoanalysis subversive. She emphasizes Freudian contra Descartes approach, namely the belief that the person is incapable of fully knowing himself. She also discusses Freud's attitude to human sexuality, which is never based on natural qualities, but rather on signification and meaning. Such concepts as death drive, ego, and object libido are never based on some a priori instinctual status, innate attribute, or biologically preformed path. For Freud, sexuality is the consequence of the interaction of the material desire on and with the child's body, Grosz says. After talking about Freud, Grosz shifts her perspective to Lacan. What makes Lacan so different from Freud? Whereas Freud's writing is lucid and accessible, Lacan often exercises deliberate obscurity. I'm gonna quote the rest of the paragraph. Where Freud gains credibility from a systematic, rational, well-argued analysis, Lacan works largely by indirection, circularity, ellipses, humor, ridicule, and wordplay. Where Freud sought to ensure the status of psychoanalysis as a science, a therapeutic and an exemplary theory, Lacan sees it not as a system of cure, explaining, or guaranteeing knowledge, but as a series of techniques for listening to and questioning desire, even those desires at work in the production of knowledge. Where Freud maintains a dignity beyond approach in his formal yet cordial reports of sexual matters, Lacan seems to go out of his way to flirt, mock, seduce, and insult. Grosz then goes on to describe Lacan's biggest achievements. She talks about his early work, his doctorate, for example, in which one can already see his understanding of the role of the image and of the social context in the formation of the personality and subjectivity. This becomes very important in his later work. Grosz tells us about Lacan's paper called Mirror Stage, which was presented at the International Psychoanalytic Congress in 1936. Here, Lacan consolidates his take on the subject. For Lacan, the human subject is always divided between itself and its mirror reflection. It's never autonomous or congruous. It's divided. Grosz also describes Lacan's weekly seminars, which began in 1951. These seminars attracted the most prominent of French intellectuals. Sartre, de Beauvoir, Lévi-Strauss, Merleau-Ponty, Barthes, Althusser, Kristeva, and Irigaray. Grosz also describes how Lacan got kicked out of the International Psychoanalysis Association for his dismissal of psychoanalytic orthodoxy, textual timidity, and reverence for canonical Freudian interpretations. Lacan compared the expulsion to excommunication. Then Grosz describes Lacan's involvement in student riots in 1968. Some people thought that Lacan was being deliberately subversive, and he directly influenced student actions in 1968. In spite of that, Lacan's approach to student riots was rather complex. He told the rioting students that they are simply looking for a new master, and they will find one day. Anyway, Lacan was a controversial figure. Some of the controversies have been bolstered by Lacan himself. Lacan's style is deliberately provocative. According to Grosz, Lacan always stretched the terms of the limits of coherence. He created a text that is difficult to enter and ultimately impossible to master. As Smith Kerrigan says, Lacan's écrits, like a dream, needs to be seen as a rebus. This book, écrits, has to be seen as a rebus. Grosz also emphasizes how Lacan, maybe even more than Freud, insisted on the heterogeneity of the unconscious and also on its opacity to conscious intention. Grosz finally ends her quick overview of Lacan's work by presenting Lacan as a public figure, loved by some and hated by others. Lacan, like Freud, always demanded absolute support from his followers. This, by extension, meant that Lacan was a cult figure in many respects. Finally, Grosz finishes her article by analyzing feminist perspectives on the topic of psychoanalysis. She talks about Juliet Mitchell's defense of Freud in her book Psychoanalysis and Feminism. Grosz thinks that feminist theory has undergone a dramatic turnabout towards psychoanalysis. Feminism now is more conciliatory towards psychoanalysis than ever before. Juliet Mitchell did a lot to show how Freud's insights have been popularized, misinterpreted, and neutralized by interpreters that were ignorant of Freud's writing. After discussing Mitchell's defense of Freud, Grosz quickly reviews Nancy Choteroff's book called The Reproduction of Mothering, where Choteroff uses psychoanalysis to provide a sociological explanation of the behavior patterns and regularities of social life. Choteroff assumes that Freud's analysis is an empirical description, which is thus capable of clinical verification or falsification. Grosz says, however, that both Mitchell and Choteroff, having done a lot to vindicate psychoanalytic thought, did not pay enough attention to the functioning of discursive and signifying systems, the domain of phallocentrism. They leave these unquestioned. Other feminists such as Irigaray or Kristeva or Cixous analyze and criticize psychoanalytic models of subjectivity in terms of sexual difference. Grosz finally finishes her essay by saying that she wants to focus on those feminist accounts of psychoanalysis that maintain some sort of a positive, even if critical, relation to Lacanian psychoanalysis. Again, Grosz says that feminists ought to rejuvenate psychoanalytic thought. We need to acknowledge the active engagement of many feminists in psychoanalytic theory. We must also place psychoanalysis in the context of history of misogyny, she says. In this book, she tries to accomplish exactly that. Thank you for watching. Have a nice day.